Okay, looks like we have a good group online with us today. We have a jam-packed session lined up, and we're here joined by our special guests, Mention, for our live masterclass on better benchmarking, beating the competition. So let's get started. And a brief overview of what we'll cover today. The session will be divided into 3 parts. And in part 1, I will cover benchmarking your success online. Jumped forward. And the what, why, and how of benchmarking, plus given an overview of specific industry benchmarks for top industries such as e-commerce, publishers, and financial services. In part 2, Francesca will go through benchmarking for social media and best practices. And in part 3, we'll cover the tools that you need to get started with benchmarking, plus save some time at the end for Q&A. So a quick introduction. My name is Chloe Nichols and I'm a product marketing manager here at Similarweb. I work for the digital research intelligence solution. And for those that aren't familiar with Similarweb, we provide business leaders with the most reliable data, offering a 360-degree view of the digital world. So our platform provides insights across websites, apps, industries, and markets at a global scale to enable you to discover untapped opportunities to grow your business. And I'm joined here with Francesca Chong, Head of Content at Mention. Francesca, over to you for a brief introduction.
Hi, I'm Francesca. So as Chloe mentioned, I'm currently the head of content here at Mention. I'm using competitive research on a regular basis to refine our content strategy in a really competitive, fast-growing market. If you don't know about Mention, it's a social listening tool. We use it to monitor and analyze conversations on the web and social media. There are many different use cases for the Mention tool, including brand reputation analysis, and we will be covering the competitive benchmarking use case today.
Excellent. Thank you, Francesca. Very happy to have you here with us. So let's dive straight in and look at benchmarking your success in the digital world. And before we begin, we just want to take a pause and talk about what is benchmarking, so you can speak the same language. Benchmarking is the act of rating one value by comparing it to a standard or point of reference. So in business, and especially in the digital world, you compare performance results and other data against specific reference points, and these are what called benchmarks. This could be the industry average, the best in class, or against a particular competitor. And we're really keen to learn from those that are online today. What is your biggest challenge when it comes to understanding your market position? So we've got a quick poll that we'll share, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your key challenges during today's masterclass. We'll just wait for a few moments, so if you can start filling it in. There we go. So is it 1, seeing how you stack up against your competitors? Number 2, determining which metrics to measure. 3 is choosing the right companies to analyze. And 4 is taking actionable steps with the insights that you've gathered. Keep voting. Thanks, everyone. So it's almost neck and neck with determining the right metrics and taking the actionable insights. Few more moments. Great. So yes, it is neck and neck. So that's really interesting. So yeah, definitely around understanding the metrics. We're definitely going to go through them from both a digital and social perspective, and we'll also talk about these actionable insights that you get from benchmarking and how you can actually apply it to your own business. So that's great. And then I think the other ones are very interesting in terms of how you stack up against the competitors, and also finding those companies. So thanks everyone for being involved in today's poll. So when we look at the different types of benchmarking, there are actually several different types which you can implement depending on your objective. So each serves as a different purpose and it compares different data sets. So the first one is strategic benchmarking. And the main goal here is to learn from the success of others. So with strategic benchmarking, you want to understand how the big winners got to where they are and how successful companies developed over time. With competitive benchmarking, it's about comparing your own company performance to a specific set of competitors or industry standards. And both strategic and competitive benchmarking are typical forms of external benchmarking. With performance benchmarking, it's all about helping you define better targets for your business. So these usually focus on performance indicators like price, quality, speed, and reliability. For internal benchmarking, so this is done in a way to look internally at your systems and processes and how you can optimize this. So, particularly around organizational growth. So, it includes internal monitoring of workload, task completion time, cost, revenue generated, and so on. And finally, with digital and social benchmarking, every company with a digital presence needs to benchmark online and particularly around their online digital performance. So, digital benchmarking covers everything from visits to your site, keyword analysis, social media metrics, and conversion data. And this is something where we'll be really focusing in today's masterclass. These two types of digital benchmarking and social media benchmarking will be a deep dive for the rest of today's session. And the types of teams that benefit from benchmarking across the business are market researchers and corporate strategy teams. And they use benchmarking to analyze the market landscape, look at the industry averages to learn whether their company is over or under indexing against the industry or their competitors. For example, if your company grew digital market share by 5%, but your industry grew by 10%, benchmarking to industry norms is a really effective way to keep your strategy aligned for optimal business growth. And for business intelligence teams, using benchmarking to constantly monitor and track digital performance, competitor insights, and to centralize data sources, this is really important to help them make timely strategic decisions based on industry benchmarks. And for consumer insights and audience teams, using benchmarking to understand market behavior, audience consumption habits, social media engagement, helps them find and retain new customers. And why is benchmarking important? So these are our top three reasons. So it's about identifying those trends in your industry. So spotting those trends early by monitoring changes in traffic and engagement metrics. And this allows you to set yourself up for more success. Number two is around understanding your growth potential. So, gauging your growth potential, identifying areas for improvement, and recognizing competitive strengths and blind spots. Number three is about knowing your position in the industry and monitoring your overall traffic share regularly to assess the effectiveness of your digital activities and flag potential threats. So now you know why benchmarking is important. Here are the 4 steps to get started with your benchmarking analysis. And the first step is just really choosing these all important KPIs to focus on for your business. For example, company growth or finding and retaining customers. The next step is to benchmark your company performance against your industry view or competitive landscape. Step 3 is determining the metrics that support your company KPIs and goals. And then finally, it's about continuously tracking and monitoring performance over time to fine tune your digital strategy. And here we have 5 examples of digital benchmarks that you can use for your analysis. So this is just some of the digital benchmarks. Obviously, it's not an exhaustive list, but if we go through them, we have bounce rate, and that's looking at the percentage of visitors who enter a site and then leave after viewing just one page. So a lower bounce rate indicates that the content is relevant to your visitors. The next one is stickiness. So that's looking at unique visitors or total visits. And this metric really evaluates the level of your customers or your audience's loyalty. The third one is marketing channels. So understanding how your audience is reaching your site. Is it through direct traffic, organic search, social media channels, for example? The fourth one is device split, so device distribution between desktop versus mobile web. And that's really about helping you identify trends in device usage for your website or your app content. And finally, session duration and pages per visit. So longer session duration indicates more engaged visitors. Higher pages per visit means your visitors are finding the content that they want. And so, how do you use these metrics to make actionable decisions? So, firstly, for device split, when you're looking at the percentage of desktop users versus mobile users, you can get an indication of where to focus your efforts and how your audience is accessing your site based on industry benchmarks. Next is total visits. So this helps you analyze how you stack up to your competitors and their total average visitors. By benchmarking directly against your competitive set, you can understand whether you have a strong online presence or if you're behind the pack, and if you have more work to do on your digital strategy. Next up is the marketing mix. So, by benchmarking marketing channels, you can understand where to make strategic investments, and you can use industry benchmarks not only to align your strategy with channels that are seeing the best traction, but also directly against your competitors. And finally, average engagement metrics such as visit duration and bounce rate. They can help you learn whether you're doing better or worse than the industry average, or identify competitors that have a high visit duration along with a low bounce rate to uncover what's working for their content strategy and keep visitors on to their site. So we're going to do another quick poll. We'd like to know, how often do you use digital industry benchmarking in your role or at your company? Are you doing it on a daily, weekly basis, more on a quarterly time frame, once or twice a year, or you're just not really looking at it at all? Great, the answers are coming in. So mostly on a daily or weekly basis, though a couple more votes to come in. So we're looking around 41% there's, and then 34% on a quarterly basis. So I think that's really interesting. We'll keep it open for a few more seconds. But yeah, definitely with times changing so quickly, we've seen a massive shift for a lot of our Similarweb customers. Obviously, they've set up their reports and they're continuously tracking, but more and more they're getting their senior management and stakeholders asking them about the changes in week over week changes as opposed to quarterly changes. So definitely keeping an eye on what's happening and tracking changes is very top of mind for a lot of executives and business leaders at the moment, especially with the changing nature of the online environment at the moment. But yeah, so it looks like most people are using it on a daily, weekly basis, which is really good to know that you're all on top of it. Thanks for joining in. So we're going to switch gears now and review industry benchmarks and what can we learn from those key metrics and insights. We'll cover the following industries, which is looking at Q1 last year in 2020 versus Q1 this year, to see what has changed year over year. So first up is publishers and media benchmarks. So if we zoom into the marketing mix, organic search has dropped from 27% to 23%, but direct traffic has grown by 7%, which indicates that the audience behavior has definitely increased over time, especially as recent news publications have been covering a lot of different topics over the last year, particularly around COVID, for example. So if I was a BI analyst at a publisher, I'd be paying very close attention to these engagement metrics to ensure that my publication was in line with the industry average. And if I was underperforming, what can I learn and what can I improve for my content to increase visit duration to my site? Looking at the digital job classification industry, the industry has grown 22%, which isn't surprising given the job market over the last year. But it's really interesting to see that the marketing mix has largely remained the same, with direct channels increasing by 4% due to rise in total visits. So for any digital strategist or analytics team within the digital job market, these industry benchmarks can help them set their goals to win back traffic share, especially from referrals, email marketing, and social media channels. Online gaming has also seen a dramatic increase of 39% year on year for total visits, with 70% of traffic coming from direct sources compared to 63% last year. And another interesting insight in that the desktop is much higher at 60%, which if I was a strategy head of an online gaming platform, I'd use these benchmarks to invest more in desktop and brand awareness to drive traffic to my website. Next, we'll look at the retail and e-commerce industry, which has seen a 17% increase in total visits. And direct and organic channels bring most of the traffic to e-commerce sites. So it really demonstrates the importance of building brand awareness and implementing a very strong organic search strategy using relevant retail related keywords. And we're looking at the average conversion rates for the retail industry. Consumer spending has made a huge shift online in 2020. Conversions across top retailers actually rose by 42%. Again, it's not surprising. Essential items like groceries have the highest conversion rates at around 19%. With the large number of individuals working or studying from home due to pandemic lockdowns, conversions for books, so around 14 to 15%, and office and school supplies, around 11, 12%, were also very, very high. Finally, we take a look at the financial services industry and see that the industry grew by 42% since the last year, with device split of 58% desktop users versus 41% mobile web users. So on an average, FinServ sites have better engagement rates compared to other industries online. And when we analyze the breakdown of the conversion rate of financial services websites by channel, we can see that referrals is the leading channel with a 14% conversion rate, followed by paid search, which is a 10% conversion rate. And using these industry benchmarks as a guide, it's recommended to use partnerships with affiliate sites as a real key focus for financial services companies, because this is clearly a leading traffic channel which they can optimize. And that's it for industry benchmarks. Next, I'm going to pass it over to Francesca, who's going to introduce another approach to benchmarking using social listening tools like Mention.
Thanks a lot, Chloe. That was really insightful. I'm sure that anyone working in these industries can find a lot of useful information from the last few slides. Um, if you can move on to the next slide. So I'm going to present a different approach to benchmarking using something called social listening. For some of you, social listening might be a completely new concept, so I'll start off by explaining exactly what it is. So it's often used interchangeably with the term social media monitoring, which is the process of monitoring what's being spoken about online on social media channels. However, social listening itself takes it one step further as it involves analysing the conversation on more of a quantitative and qualitative level. So the tool, it's pretty versatile and flexible. You can use it for understanding the online conversation around your own brand, your competitors' brands, your industry, or a specific topic. So basically, if people are talking about something online, you can start monitoring and analysing and even further leveraging the conversation to your advantage. So unlocking these insights, they can help to inspire your own strategy, to understand your industry better, and also find ways of capitalizing on your competitors' activities. So in the context of competitive analysis, there are three main examples of things that you can learn from social listening. You can get a gauge on your competitors' content, PR, and social media strategies. You can learn what your competitors' customers think about them, and you can understand your competitor's brand reputation. And all of these insights can then be leveraged into your own marketing and sales strategies. If we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So who can benefit from social media marketing, benchmarking, sorry. When you hear social listening, it can be tempting to dismiss it as just a tool that's for social media managers or even marketing managers. However, there's great value for lots of different types of teams within the company. Of course, great value for marketing managers. Social media benchmarking can help you to understand you and your competitors' relative positioning, to allow you to compare your strategies, and also to understand both yours and your competitors' target audiences better. This can help to build better marketing personas, to target your communications and marketing in a better way. For content teams, such as myself, you can use social media benchmarking to define a competitive content strategy, to generate new content ideas, but also to fill in the gaps between what your competitors' audience expects and what you can provide. You can also use social media monitoring to identify key influencers, blogs, and other sources for backlink exchanges and other collaborations. For example, if you see that a particular blog or an influencer is working with your competitor, there's a good chance that they'll work with you too. Moving away from the marketing team, however, you can see that sales teams can benefit also from social media benchmarking by knowing their customers, your competitors better, and knowing what you can offer and what they can't. Your prospect has lots of different options to choose from, and having this knowledge can help you to adapt the sales conversation to your advantage. And lastly, with product teams, of course, understanding what features your competitors have and don't have, but also learning from your competitors' customers' thoughts on their UX and accessibility issues, making sure that your product doesn't make the same mistakes. So earlier with the Similarweb industry benchmarks, we saw that you would compare your brand against a big data set of all of your competitors to assess how you fit in and how you mark up. However, social listening is a little bit more of a qualitative approach. So in terms of selecting your competitors, you want to go for quality over quantity. I would recommend being very picky with the competitors that you choose, and we wouldn't go for more than 5 or 6 at a time. So the competitors that you choose will actually depend on what you want to get out of your benchmark and what really you want to analyze. I would say that the most common way of social media benchmarking is to select just a few direct competitors who are very closely aligned with your value proposition and also your company goals. You can then take a comparative approach or do a deep dive into just one of their social media channels. I'll be demonstrating very shortly how we use mention for both of these approaches. Secondly, you can also look at the industry leaders. This can be very helpful to inspire best practices on social media and content. Even if they're not targeting exactly the same market as you are, you can still get some inspiration from them. And lastly, cross-industry benchmarks would involve looking at leaders or even comparable organizations in completely different industries to yours. You can get a lot of inspiration from this type of benchmarking and even find ways to innovate in your industry to be one step ahead of your competitors. So the approach that I like to take with competitive analysis is to start first with the metric that I want to measure, and then always have an observation related to that metric, investigate a bit deeper, and then follow up with a clear action or learning. In terms of social engagement, here are some of the key metrics that you can focus on. There are many more, but these are the ones that we're going to be diving into a little bit more detail today. And these examples also assume that you're taking a direct competitor approach and analysing competitors that have the same target audience that you do. So the first one that we'll be looking at is the volume of mentions over time. And then we'll be looking at the audience sentiment analysis, the sources of your mentions, and the day of week and hour of day engagement. So over the next few slides, we'll be taking a case study, and we have picked 3 direct competitors in the media and publishing industry. This is Vox, Vice, and Refinery29. So these are 3 news outlets who are mostly targeting the same market, and we'll be analysing the way in which their audience is engaging with them on social media in relation to these metrics. So the first metric that we'll look at is the volume of mentions over time. So here we can see a graph over the last 30 days of the volume of mentions for all 3 of these media outlets. One of the observations that you can see is that on April 29th, there was an unusually high volume of mention for Vox. So we dig a bit deeper here. We want to see, did they do something good, whether they did something bad. We can then look at also additional metrics such as sentiment analysis to see if the conversation around the brand is mostly positive or negative. So if we go to the next slide. So by digging a bit deeper, we can see that actually the amount of negative mentions had increased by around 49% week on week. Neutral mentions 111% higher. And for the positive mentions, they actually dropped. And we can attribute this to a post that they posted on April 29th, so the day before, which was related to the environmental impact of pets. Having a look more at the social listening side of things, we can see how people reacted to this post. As you can see, many influencers and many people on Twitter were very upset about this post. There was one that went viral. Is it my dog, or is it 100 companies producing 70% of global emissions? So we can see that this is a topic that the audience takes seriously, that they didn't agree with the sentiment behind the post that Vox was going for. And if I was a media or publication, I would learn from this situation to prevent the same negative press around my brand, to avoid going into these kinds of topics. And also, if I wanted to capitalize on the attention that Vox was getting at this time, I could even publish my own article criticizing Vox in that space. So the second metric that we can look at is the audience sentiment analysis. This can be combined, as we saw just now, with other metrics to bring deeper meaning to them. We saw just now how it helped to add context to that spike in Vox's mentions. So we can observe this over time. You can see, for example, if your competitor's sentiment analysis is becoming increasingly negative, you might want to investigate to see if it's an indicator that they're declining in quality, or again, if a series of brand crises has occurred to your competitor. You should also investigate if the issue is something linked to that one specific competitor, or if it's affecting all of your competitors. So perhaps it would be an industry-wide issue. And if this is the case, you might want to start thinking about putting a crisis management team in place, or even prepare for the spotlight to turn onto you if the reason for their negative sentiment could also apply to you. However, if it's only related to one specific competitor, you might want to jump in and join the conversation and offer a solution to their customers. So having a look at the analysis here, we can see that Vox and Vice have a pretty stable balance of positive and negative and neutral mentions over the last 30 days. However, what we can see with Refinery 29, while they have a lower volume of mentions overall, they have proportionally higher positive mentions. So if we have a look on the next slide, we can have a look at some of the reasons why that might be. So we can see that actually it was on the 26th of April that there were even higher positive mentions than usual. And we can attribute this to Refinery 29's live tweeting of the Oscars. So they took a different approach to the other two publications, to the Oscars night. They went for a live tweeting approach, including very humorous and uplifting commentaries. You can see by some of the examples in the feed. They were celebrating wins from people of color, admiring the outfits of the attendees, and also engaging very heavily with their audience throughout the night by retweeting and replying to their followers. So this engagement tactic had an overall very positive influence on their overall audience sentiment statistics, which showed in the previous slide with the balance of negative and positive sentiment. But if we see on the next slide, in comparison, we have Vox. While we do see that the mentions on Oscar night did increase, they were overwhelmingly neutral. They actually took a different approach to their coverage of the Oscars night. It was very factual. While they did, of course, comment on the topics of diversity, their tone was a lot more neutral, and this resulted in a neutral sentiment, of course. They did not live tweet the Oscars like Refinery 29 did, but they just shared articles throughout the night on the subject, but also mixed in with articles on other subjects. So if you're a media and publications organization, you can take some lessons from these two approaches, and you could see that perhaps it might be worth taking more of an engaging approach on events such as these. So you can also look at the sources of your mentions. So you can see who is talking about your competitors, as well as the publications that are mentioning your competitors as well. This can be a very useful insight to know when you're reaching out for partnerships, for endorsements. It's a very good place to start. So if we look at the list of the media and influencers who spoke about Vox, Vice, and Refinery 29 over the last 30 days, we can see some pretty big differences in the top publications. So if we look at Refinery 29, for example, we can see Hillary Clinton up there at the top, who was one of the key influencers who mentioned Refinery 29. This might give us a little bit of an insight into the political leaning of Refinery 29's audience. And we can also see that for Vice, there are many business-focused publications in their top influencers, and this can indicate some alliances there as well. And lastly, another metric that can be very interesting to observe would be around the day of week and hour of day engagement. So this is a question about when, what time of the day and what day of the week your competitors' followers engage with their posts. So if you can see, for example, that the hours of the day where your competitors' audience are highly engaged matches with their posting schedule, you know that they're doing something right. For example, we can see here that Vice, the audience of Vice are less engaged on Saturday afternoons compared to Vox and Refinery 29. We can see that Vox stays engaged the whole weekend. And if we go on to the next slide, we can see when they posted to compare this to the audience engagement time of day statistics. So all three publications posted less on social media on the weekends, but comparing all three publications together, we can see that Vice actually posted a little bit proportionally less than usual. This might be an explanation for the drop in mentions, and can also help to inform your social media strategy if you're a media and publications company. As you can see that for many of the publications, their audience still want to engage on the weekends, but if there are fewer posts to engage with, then the engagement will drop. So we'll pause here with a quick poll question, just as we had earlier. We'd like to know which social media channels that you benchmark the most in your business. Is it Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, or perhaps another social media channel? So actually, I can't see the results of the poll, but perhaps Chloe can share some insights on how people are responding.
Yeah. So I can see them coming in. So we're actually getting a very high percentage on LinkedIn and Instagram, which is interesting. Twitter is very low, which is, again, is very interesting because it just sort of shows the focus of the audience. So we'll give it a couple more minutes for those to vote who are on today, but it looks like LinkedIn is leading the pack, followed by Instagram and then Facebook and Twitter. And someone suggested other, so I don't know if that's TikTok. I was going to put that in as a social media channel. I know that's absolutely risen over the last year. But yeah, it's neck and neck, LinkedIn versus Instagram.
Very interesting. So we can, yeah, there are very different approaches that you can take to analyzing each of the channels. But I would say that the principles remain the same. Picking a metric, looking for an observation, and then doing a deeper dive to see why a particular metric has changed over time. So another approach that you can take to social media benchmarking is to go more deep into one of the channels, for example, Instagram or Facebook, and you can take a closer look at your competitors' top performing posts, key influencers, hashtags, and follower evolution. So this is a really useful tactic for social media managers, for marketing managers, for social media community managers as well. So if you go to the next slide, here are some of the things that you can learn, for example, by monitoring the top Twitter hashtags for each of these 3 publications. As you can see here, all of Vox's hashtags are hot hashtags, which is indicated by the little flame next to the hashtag, even if they don't seem to be using hashtags as frequently as Vice and Refinery. We can also see here by the hashtag analysis that Vice are jumping on more political and social justice hashtags, for example, related to the current affairs like Stop Asian Hate and Mogadishu. And we can see that also Refinery 29 are a big fan of branded hashtags. They are using them quite frequently in a lot of different areas. Whether that helps their engagement is still remain to be seen, and it's something that you can analyze alongside other metrics. For the next slide, you can see also the number of tweets per day for Vox. We can see their tweet schedule. We can see that on the weekends that they go very quiet, as we noticed this had an impact on their engagement on the weekends. You can also see the type of media that they're posting. And again, this is something that can be analyzed alongside other metrics to see how their engagement stats are going. And with the last one, so here is also an example of picking out just the top tweets for Vice over the last 30 days. So using a tool like Mention to pick out these tweets means that you don't have to search through an entire feed. You can just get the top tweets in one view. And that's it for the social media benchmarking. We'll go on to the next section, which is a little bit more about creating an overall strategy around digital benchmarking and how you can incorporate both social media listening and benchmarking with Similarweb into your strategy. So one of the questions that you might have, and is something that we discussed earlier with the poll, is when would you ideally benchmark? So there are 2 different approaches that you can take. You can do it as a one-off activity, which might be quite useful to benchmark in more detail and focus on the aspects relevant to a particular change taking place in your organization. For example, if you're going through a major brand refresh, a new product launch, a change in your team, if you've recently joined a company as a head of marketing, doing a one-off benchmark in a lot of detail can really help to unlock a lot of interesting insights and help to further fuel your strategy changes. However, I would say it's very advantageous to keep an eye on your competitor benchmark continuously throughout the year on a regular basis, whether that's monthly, quarterly, weekly, as some of you have already said. Also, you can align your benchmarking with particular marketing and campaign schedules. So, for example, if you know that you're launching a campaign every month, you can do your benchmark and you can make sure that your benchmark is aligned with that campaign schedule. This is where tools such as Mention and Similarweb come very useful, because you have the ability to set up alerts and reports in advance. This helps to save a lot of time when you're doing ongoing benchmarking, so you don't have to set up these reports every single time that you're doing a benchmark. You can just log in and you can see what you've had saved, and you can just review them on a regular basis. The tool does all the work for you. You just need to observe and then put your learnings into action. So to summarize what we discussed today, how we would use tools like Mention and Similarweb to improve your benchmarking strategy. So there are a lot of challenges if you try to do benchmarking without tools like ours. For example, you might miss key trends and insights, such as how volumes are changing over time. We saw in the example with Vox's pet climate change situation. Without a tool, I would not have been able to catch that spike in mentions simply by looking at their newsfeed alone.
Yes, and for number two, it's looking at that macro view. So without having a macro view of your industry landscape, particularly around the online digital world, it makes it really difficult to contextualize your digital performance and how you and your company is doing versus industry benchmarks. And we saw that when we looked at the industry benchmarks for retail versus financial services, media and publishers. Each industry has a different pulse, if you will, in terms of what's the industry average. So it's really important to be able to get that macro view, and using tools like Similarweb, you can really benchmark yourself against the industry.
Another advantage of using tools is the ability to use filters as well. So when you're benchmarking, when you're researching your competitors, you're going to be getting a lot of information. And if you're not able to filter it in a way that's relevant to your business and digestible by others, it can be very difficult to share these insights with others, which is something that you should be doing definitely when you're benchmarking.
Yeah, and looking at the most relevant competitors to watch and obviously beat, having tools like Mention and Similarweb means that you can choose those specific competitors based on your unique competitive sets. And you can use these tools to be alerted of emerging threats and competitors that you might not have already had on your radar. So it's a great way to get the relevancy of your benchmarking aligned to what is actually important and impacts your business.
Yes, and also leading on from that, there are really specific insights that you simply wouldn't be able to get without a tool. Things like traffic figures, the influence score from Mention, keyword analyses. If you don't have a tool like Similarweb or Mention, it can be very, very difficult to get these indicators.
And finally, you're going to save a lot of time gathering information where you can centralize all your data and your reports from one or two sources. Quite simply, it's going to take you a lot longer to find these insights if you're manually researching and monitoring benchmarks and going into different social media channels, for example, or going onto a website and looking at their stats and individually. It's much easier to do it through just our tools like Mention and Similarweb. And Fran, she mentioned it earlier, it's about continuously monitoring as well, and that saves you time when you create these reports once, and then you just let the tools go along and monitor for you, doing all that heavy lifting. So great. We're going to almost wrap it up. We've got some time for Q&A. There's just a few more slides we'll go through. Oh dear, sorry. We actually have a poll. So we wanted to learn about you and where you're at with benchmarking, and if we can support you in any way for your business needs. So let us know if you'd like more of a personalized session based on you and your competitor set. And no worries if it's not right now, maybe in the future if you're not ready, or it's just not something you're looking at. But we hope that you are, because you've joined today's masterclass. And we hope that you can use some of these insights as well for your own benchmarking analysis. So yeah, we really hope that it's been actionable, both from a digital benchmarking versus social media benchmarking, because both are very, very important for your online strategy. Great. So we've got a few answers coming in. We'll leave it open for just a couple of more minutes. And I see that there's been a few responses in the chat as well. So like I said before, the slides went a bit went forward there. We just will highlight some of the key resources and templates so that you can get started with your digital marketing and benchmarking strategy. Great. Thanks for everyone that got involved. So yeah, so we're really happy that you've joined us today. Here are some of the benchmarking templates and guides that you can use. So we've got the playbook, our competitive analysis guide, benchmarking toolkit, and trend analysis template. And then Francesca has also included from the Mention team for social listening, best practices, and how to build a competitor monitoring plan. So using Mention to really analyze your online social benchmarks. So these are just a few guides. We have recorded the session today, and we'll also share the deck itself, so you can click into the links and download them. But that brings us to a close. Thank you so much, Francesca, for taking the time out today and sharing the perspective from Mention. We hope that you've enjoyed today's session. I'm going to have a look quickly at some of the answers Q&A. And we do have a question from an anonymous attendee, so I don't know who it's asked, but is what is the regional coverage of the industry or macro data, which is a great question. So at Similarweb, we have 190 countries. So our data is very global in terms of the industry landscape. And if you have, we do have a breakdown of US regions as well. So just get in touch with us and we can share you a bit more information. I don't know if Francesca, you have any feedback on regional coverage for social Mention?
Yeah, so when you're using the Mention tool, you can filter all of your results by region, and actually we highly recommend doing that to get the most relevant results for your organization.
Great. We don't have any open questions, but we've had someone ask about when to benchmark, and I think that's a great question. We've covered it a couple of times in today's masterclass, but I think we've definitely, like I mentioned, seen a real shift from the quarterly benchmark and looking at more on a weekly benchmark because of the changing shifts in industry dynamics recently. But we can also see that these shifts have been really skewed, I would say, from 2020. Particularly, we've seen pre and post COVID pandemic metrics and how like actually the actual different averages have actually skewed a lot for 2020. So we do actually recommend to a lot of our customers to look at pre-pandemic levels, just so that when markets recover and return and normalize, they're basing their benchmarks off effectively the actual industry average data. And we've got a question around when would you recommend to start benchmarking if you've never used or chosen a benchmarking tool? So I don't know if Francesca, you have a few top tips on how to go about it for benchmarking.
I would just say just get started, especially with tools like Mention and Similarweb. They're really easy to set up. Start off small, compare perhaps one or two competitors at the beginning. If you want to expand out your reach after that, then you can do so. But just starting by doing a competitive analysis with a single competitor can help you to familiarize yourself with the tool, with the processes, with the benchmarks, and the metrics that you're looking at as well. So that would be my advice. Start small and you can always build your way up.
We've got a question here as well around drilling down the US with multicultural segments. So I think that's really more around looking at different cohorts. So in terms of our audience data, we can see it by gender and age, demographics. We don't have multicultural, Gail, but feel free to follow up with us. I would love to learn more about what you mean by that segmentation. And we've also got someone asking around, is Similarweb particularly similar to Google Analytics? So we see ourselves as a tool to be able to look at the analytics of websites. It's similar, but it's definitely not the same as Google Analytics. We actually it's a great way to get competitive insights and get an estimation of key traffic and engagement metrics for any website or app within the digital world. So yeah, we wouldn't say it is Google Analytics, definitely not, but it's a great way to get that estimation of sites and what's happening, the traffic and trends online. And any more questions? So there's one, how can I find out who is my most relevant competitors are? That's a really good one. I don't know, Francesca, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, one of the main ways that you can find out who the most relevant competitors are is by asking your existing customers and your audience. They have a good idea of competitors that they've used or perhaps considered. Another way you can find out is by looking at industry reports and also, you know, benchmarking reports such as the ones provided by Similarweb. There are lots of different ways you can find out who are the most relevant to you. I would recommend going for competitors who have similar figures related to kind of traffic numbers, social followers, kind of audience sizes, so that you're comparing yourself with someone who's on your level and not comparing yourself too much with someone who's above or below you.
And similarly on Similarweb, one of my favorite features is our market quadrant analysis and our industry leaders feature. And what you can do is you can find competitors by growth. So those competitors that are seeing growth month over month are emerging players that you might not have considered. So that's a great way to get an idea of potential competitors in regions that you might not play in, just to understand who's hot, who's rising up on the ranks, and who you should be aware of. And then we also have various ways of identifying competitors through keyword research, for example, and companies that are putting a lot of investment into paid social or paid advertising as well. So they are other indicators of potential players that you should keep on your radar. And we have a question, we only have a minute or so left, but we had a question around benchmarking the competition in Google's SEO. So we do have keyword analysis. So you can definitely look at SEO as a strong point, I guess, of our product. And in terms of keywords ideas, yes, this is definitely how content strategy teams use Similarweb. So not just for benchmarking, but also using it for content ideas for both Similarweb and Mention.
Yes, for mention as well, I'd like to mention that we also have a word cloud feature, so you can see kind of the key topics that your competitors or other brands are talking about and at what frequency. We also showed during the presentation the hot hashtags feature and the top tweets, and this can pick out some key topics and some key hashtags that you can use in your social media management.
Great. So that actually brings us to a close. We have ended on time, which is great. Francesca, thank you so much again. It was really fun to work with you on this masterclass. I hope for those that have stuck with us online have learned something new about benchmarking and have been inspired by going out and having a look at your benchmarking analysis. Again, we appreciate those that have been involved in all our polls. We'll get in touch with those that want to do a bit more of a deeper dive after today's session. And we'll definitely share the recording and the slides afterwards. And for those that have left us feedback in the chat channel, thank you so much. I know Yara, our marketing team, has been replying, so that's great. And I wish you all a good rest of the day. So thanks again, and see you very, very soon.
Yes, thanks for having me. See you
Thank
soon.
you.
Have a great day.